A routine plumbing call turned into a nightmare when a clog in the pipes led to a grotesque discovery. Human flesh, tangled hair, even a severed head hidden in a freezer, as investigators unraveled the grisly details. An innocent schoolgirl's torso pulled from a harbor months earlier, mutilated remains flushed through sewage, and a seemingly polite neighbor whose home reeked of decay. A chilling pattern began to emerge, hinting at a predator who'd spent years eluding suspicion. How did one man's obsession with dark pleasures go unnoticed for over a decade? And what other horrors lie buried beneath the surface of this quiet suburban street? This is the murder of Rory Rush and Candace Fitzpatrick. Many crimes, unfortunately, go unsolved for a variety of reasons. Forensic specialists point out that this often occurs when all possible theories aren't taken into account or when certain leads are not thoroughly investigated. As a result, grieving families may never uncover the truth behind a loved one's disappearance or death. Yet some crimes come to light over time, often by sheer accident. The investigation into the case of Rory Rush, a teenage girl, began unexpectedly with a plumber's visit to fix a blocked sewer line. What followed was the discovery of several horrific crimes committed against schoolgirls. The case gained significant attention, especially when the suspect was linked to a similar crime that had taken place a decade earlier. While many were convinced the authorities had captured a serial offender who preyed on young women, only 2 of the crimes could be conclusively proven, despite the abundance of evidence. Unidentified torso found in water. On September 11, 2017, in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada, a local fisherman made a chilling discovery at the city harbor, a badly decomposed and mutilated human torso floating in the water. He quickly contacted the police, who retrieved the remains and transported them to the forensic medical office for examination and identification. However, forensic experts immediately encountered significant challenges in determining the identity of the victim. The body was missing its limbs and head, and had been almost entirely gutted. Forensic examiners could only determine that the remains belonged to a young woman between the ages of 18 and 25. Identification through fingerprints, dental records, or distinctive physical features was impossible. There was, however, a partial tattoo on the neck, but due to the severe decomposition, it was impossible to discern its design. DNA testing was the only remaining option, yet no matches were found in any existing databases. As a result, authorities began reviewing all recent missing persons cases involving young women. It wasn't until November, almost 2 months after the torso was found, that investigators confirmed the remains belonged to 18-year-old high school student Rory Hatch, who had vanished in mid-August, roughly a month before the discovery. At the time of her disappearance, Rory was pregnant. In the weeks that followed, divers searched the harbor and surrounding areas of Lake Ontario extensively, but no additional remains, neither limbs nor head, were ever recovered. Determining the exact time and cause of death proved to be impossible. However, forensic experts discovered multiple severe injuries on the body, all inflicted while the victim was still alive. This raised suspicions that the young woman had endured prolonged torture before her death. A disturbing neighbor. The case took an unexpected turn 4 months later in December when David Wood and his family moved into a home at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa. Almost immediately, they were troubled by a strong, unpleasant odor. Their downstairs neighbor, a 45-year-old single man named Adam Strong, who lived in the other half of the duplex, dismissed it as a minor plumbing issue he planned to resolve soon. Though Adam presented himself as polite and friendly, something about him felt unsettling. When David's wife brought over homemade cookies as a neighborly gesture, he refused to let her inside. Instead, he stepped into the hallway and quickly shut the door behind him. Before he did, she caught a glimpse of his apartment. It was in complete disarray, and the stench coming from inside was overpowering. Adam accepted the cookies with thanks and quickly excused himself. Later, when he encountered the neighbors in the yard, he apologized for not inviting them in earlier, claiming he was about to begin renovations and that his apartment was in poor condition. Though he maintained a polite demeanor, his uneasiness was obvious. Over the following days, as the Wood family continued settling in, they did their best to ignore the lingering foul odor. But by December 29th, the stench had become unbearable, and they called a plumber to investigate a suspected sewer blockage. While the issue initially appeared minor, what the workers found left even seasoned forensic professionals stunned. Body parts in the pipes, a head in the fridge. Plumber Sean Farnaden and his colleague began clearing the obstruction in the Wood family's unit. Although familiar with foul smells from their line of work, they were alarmed by the intensity of the odor. It soon became clear that the source was coming from below. Following the trail, they descended to the lower level to Adam Strong's apartment. Reluctantly, Adam allowed the plumbers inside, apologizing for the untidiness. The odor inside his apartment was significantly worse. As the workers approached the blocked section of the pipe, the smell became almost unbearable. Sean later admitted that in all his years on the job, he had never encountered anything so overwhelmingly foul. But what they were about to discover was far more horrifying than the smell alone. At that point, the visibly anxious homeowner began acting even more oddly. He hovered nearby, repeatedly asking what the plumbers planned to do and how long it would take. Later, he claimed his behavior was due to curiosity, saying he had never witnessed such work before. The plumbers did their best to ignore his odd behavior and continue the task. But soon, they retrieved over 10 kilograms of flesh, entangled with long strands of hair and fragments of bone from the pipe. Sean was horrified when he noticed disfigured, partially decomposed human fingers among the remains. The apartment owner put on a shocked expression, claiming he had never seen anything so revolting in his life. He then asked the plumbers if they had any idea how such material could have ended up in the pipe. Farnaden chose not to speculate and instead decided to contact the police immediately. He reported the disturbing find, stating that he had likely uncovered human remains. He gave the address and stayed on site, ensuring Adam didn't tamper with anything or attempt to get rid of potential evidence. When officers arrived, they quickly confirmed Sean's suspicion. The material pulled from the pipes was indeed human flesh. When police questioned the resident, they expected denial or some kind of elaborate excuse. Instead, Adam lowered his head and calmly admitted that the remains of a woman had gotten lodged in the pipes. He added that if the police were looking for additional body parts, they would find them in the freezer. Inside the freezer, officers discovered the severed head of a young woman sealed in a plastic bag, along with other dismembered limbs, presumably the parts that couldn't be flushed down the toilet. The apartment itself was filthy and appeared to have gone untouched by cleaning for a very long time. The kitchen was in a shocking state, overflowing with dirty dishes, many still containing rotting food. Garbage covered the floor, empty pizza boxes were scattered throughout the room, and mixed in with the mess were numerous magazines featuring explicit sadomasochistic content. Police also found various sex toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and equipment specifically designed for restraining or suspending someone. Who was Adam Strong? Adam Strong was immediately arrested and brought in for police questioning. Investigators were stunned. He had no prior criminal record, and had never come to the attention of law enforcement. Nothing in his background raised any red flags. He had been living quietly at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa since early 2007, and no previous neighbors had ever reported any issues with him. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in the small town of Cornwall, located in Stormont County, Ontario. Very little is known about Adam Strong's family or early life. He was unmarried, had no children, and lived alone. Professionally, he held modest jobs, working as a gas station attendant and occasionally as a security guard on film set. People who knew him personally described him as odd and eccentric, someone who liked to believe he was intellectually superior. He often engaged in arguments to assert his opinions, but was not considered aggressive or hostile. When police reviewed Adams' social media profiles, they discovered a clear and open fascination with BDSM. He made no effort to conceal his interests, frequently sharing related photos and videos. Although he never had a long-term partner, several of his former companions described him as a sadist who subjected them to disturbing forms of sexual abuse, which eventually drove them away. Another of Adams' unusual habits was writing reviews for adult films and magazines, evidence that he spent nearly all of his free time consuming and analyzing explicit content. On the surface, Adam Strong gave no indication of being a criminal. He appeared calm and collected throughout. House of Horrors at 19 Macmillan Drive. The police quickly secured Strong's home as a crime scene. Knowing this was just the beginning of a lengthy investigation. Even a preliminary inspection suggested that further disturbing discoveries could emerge, potentially as shocking as the severed head found in the refrigerator. From the start, law enforcement suspected that the head, limbs, and flesh found in the pipes belonged to Rory Hash, the young woman whose torso had been recovered from the water months earlier. This theory was reinforced by a tattoo on the neck and confirmed through DNA testing, which removed all remaining doubts. Investigators uncovered blood-stained clothing and shoes belonging to Rory, hidden beneath piles of trash in various rooms throughout Adams' apartment. Blood traces were also found on the bedroom bed, identified as Rory's, and splattered across the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling of the same room. The kitchen contained a chilling feature, an actual dissection table, which was likely where the suspect dismembered and gutted the victim. Blood stains, skin fragments, hair, and bone pieces were scattered everywhere, creating a gruesome scene that caused nausea for anyone who saw it. The bathroom was equally filthy, covered in dirt, blood, and evidence of violent acts. The toilet had been removed and was lying broken in a corner amid the trash. It was clear that Strong had attempted to dispose of the body by flushing it in pieces down the sewer. When he encountered a blockage, he tried to clear it himself but failed. Authorities also discovered a wide array of sharp weapons in the apartment, probably used by Adam to cut up the girl's body. Some knives still bore fresh blood stains. Additionally, semen matching Adam's DNA was found on the body parts recovered from the refrigerator. Who was Rory Hash? Let's explore the life of the victim, how she ended up in the home of her attacker, and what ultimately happened to her. Rory Hash was born on September 7, 1999, in Oshawa. She was the only child of Shannon Dion, her mother. Her father left before her birth and never played a role in her life. Rory was raised in a rather unconventional family environment. Her maternal grandfather was the founder and leader of a motorcycle club called Satan's Choice and was also a skilled boxer with deep ties to the criminal underworld. Rory's uncle was involved with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, lived a bold lifestyle, and faced his own legal issues. Despite these connections, Rory's childhood was relatively peaceful and happy. Her mother and grandmother did everything they could to care for her, surrounding her with love and support. Rory was a diligent student, passionate about dance, and had even won awards in competitions. People remembered Rory as an intelligent, sensible, and kind-hearted child. At just 13 years old, she earned the award for Best Cadet in her local Army unit. However, when she turned 15, her life took a downward turn. A friend introduced her to drugs, and she quickly became addicted. She started spending time with questionable people, neglected her schoolwork, and eventually stopped going to school altogether. For about a year, her family tried to support her recovery by placing her in various treatment clinics, but she relapsed repeatedly, caught in a painful cycle. At 17, Rory ran away from home and began offering intimate services in exchange for money to buy drugs. At this point, her mother Shannon reached out to a specialized program for teens struggling with addiction, which arranged for Rory to undergo mandatory treatment. Thankfully, the efforts were successful and Rory managed to return to a more stable life. She found a job as a salesperson at a local store and studied remotely to complete her high school diploma with plans to attend college in the future. Additionally, Rory began a serious relationship with a young man named Anthony, and in the spring of 2017, they decided to move in together. In June of that year, she told her mother she was pregnant and intended to keep the baby. Nearly 18 and mature enough, Rory received her mother's support for this decision. However, Shannon was unaware that her daughter had started using drugs again. In mid-August, Rory met with local constable Christopher Crane at a shopping center. Crane had been keeping an eye on her situation for the past 18 months, making sure she didn't fall back into bad influences. That day, Rory admitted to him that she had relapsed into drug use, lost her job a month earlier, and had been exchanging intimate favors for money or drugs. Deeply concerned, Crane promised to help and asked her to wait while he made an urgent call to arrange her hospitalization. But when he returned, Rory had disappeared, and the constable couldn't find her anywhere. The following day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her incoherent from drug use. For reasons unknown, they didn't stay with her but left her waiting in the emergency room queue, stepping out for about an hour. When they returned, Rory was gone and was never seen alive again. Surveillance footage revealed she had simply stood up, walked to the exit, and left the hospital. Her family filed a missing person report the next day. But despite widespread searches and the rapid sharing of information on social media, no trace of her was found. Although it was never conclusively determined how Rory ended up at Strong's house, it's believed that her urgent need for drugs led her there to offer intimate services to him. Investigation begins after Adam promptly told police where the remaining body parts were located. Investigators hoped he would start confessing. However, once at the station, he became withdrawn, refused to answer questions, and remained calm without admitting any guilt. Since there was no direct proof tying him to the girl's murder, Adam was only charged with desecrating a body. Despite his lawyer's efforts, he was denied bail and remained jailed awaiting trial. Investigators struggled to find an effective way to break through to him, attempting to provoke an emotional reaction during questioning. Yet Strong was shrewd, skillfully dodging inquiries about how Hash ended up in his home and what he had done to her. Meanwhile, he freely discussed his passion for bladed weapons and his large knife collection. Searches at Strong's residence continued, and in a closet, investigators discovered a grimy hunting knife with dried skin fragments that looked human. DNA testing showed these samples did not match Rory but belonged to someone else. It took several months to identify the source, and by July 2017, it was confirmed that the traces on the blade came from a young woman named Candace Fitzpatrick, who had vanished nearly 10 years prior. So, who was the first victim? Candace Fitzpatrick shared many similarities with Rory Hesh. Like Rory, Candace struggled with drug addiction and legal troubles, grew up in a difficult family environment, frequently ran away from home, and often disappeared for months, living with acquaintances and surviving by exchanging sexual favors for money or drugs. Born in 1989, she was 18 when she went missing. Her family didn't immediately report her disappearance, waiting almost 2 years before filing a missing person report, by which time any leads had long since dried up. Moreover, her lifestyle and social circles made it easy for many to assume she could have ended up anywhere. For a decade, Candace's parents believed she had simply run away and held on to hope that she would return. However, the 2018 police revelations crushed their hopes of ever seeing her alive again. It's also striking that both victims were the same age and bore a remarkable resemblance, almost like sisters. This fueled the belief that law enforcement had captured a serial predator. Although Fitzpatrick and Hash weren't the only victims, only Rory's remains were ever recovered. The bold criminal, when questioned about the second woman, Strong surprisingly chose to negotiate. Aware of his precarious situation, he offered to cooperate, but only if granted better prison conditions. He demanded a private cell, a large TV, internet access, and even specified the meals he wanted. Law enforcement was furious at his audacity, but agreed in hopes of extracting valuable information. Adam began by sharing his troubled childhood, revealing years of abuse by his stepfather starting at age 5, and how by 7, he had begun torturing and killing animals, deriving physical gratification from it. He openly discussed his intimate preferences and lamented never finding a partner who shared his interests. When the conversation shifted to Rory, he chillingly described with apparent satisfaction how he had dismembered her, expressing frustration that his plumbing had ultimately failed him. The police, however, couldn't get him to confess to her death. Strong maintained that the woman had died from an overdose and that he had only disposed of her body. When first questioned about Candace, he appeared surprised, noting that it had been a decade since her disappearance. He asked how the police had come across information about her. Upon learning about the flesh found on the old knife, he grew somber and expressed regret for not taking more care to protect himself. Strong admitted to knowing Candace, but denied causing her death. Still, the evidence didn't back up his claims and ended up implicating him further. In an attempt to stir some empathy or guilt, officers told him Rory had been pregnant when she died. Adam strongly denied this. A detective pointed out that the pregnancy was in its early stages and might not have been obvious, but Strong insisted he would have noticed. At that point, investigators realized Strong would stubbornly argue to defend himself, so they tried to provoke him into revealing more than he intended. They insisted the victim was pregnant, and Strong pushed back, claiming he had personally examined her and held her reproductive organs, finding nothing. As he got caught up in his own story and vividly recalled the experience, he began describing the details and sensations, mentioning the flesh was soft and warm, and even spoke of feeling a pulse. This led law enforcement to suspect the woman might still have been alive at that moment. Later, Adam tried to retract his statements, but his recorded confession was used as evidence in court. He never revealed what happened to Candace's body, which was never recovered. Detectives also failed to uncover information about any additional victims. In one of the final interrogations, Strong coldly remarked, "I don't know if it matters, but I would like my condolences passed on to the girl's parents." The case then moved to trial and sentencing. The defense lawyers argued that Adam Strong was mentally ill and therefore incapable of fully understanding or controlling his actions, insisting he needed psychiatric treatment rather than prison. The court had to determine if he was sane and legally responsible or if his mental state excused his crimes. After a thorough psychiatric evaluation, it was concluded that despite some psychological disorders, Strong was aware of what he was doing and could be held accountable under the law. The trial officially began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace's disappearance. Strong faced charges for 2 counts of murder and the desecration of Rory's remains. Though Strong never confessed guilt outright, the overwhelming evidence found at his residence, along with his own statements during interrogation, left no doubt about his role in these horrific crimes. 4 of his former partners testified, recounting his cruelty and violent tendencies. The prosecution painted a grim picture. Strong lured both victims to his home with promises of payment for intimate services. Given his specific sadomasochistic preferences and the forensic evidence on Rory's body, it was believed that he restrained and tormented her over an extended period, eventually killing her out of fear she might expose him to the authorities. On September 4th, investigators detected a signal from Strong's mobile phone near the city harbor, the very place where he had disposed of Rory's torso, hoping the currents would carry the remains away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was convicted for the murders of Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, along with the desecration of Rory's remains. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The verdict barely fazed him. In his closing statement, Strong remarked that his prison cell was far more comfortable than his previous living conditions. 6 months after the sentencing, in an unexpected turn, Strong revealed the location of Candace Fitzpatrick's remains. Following his guidance, the police conducted an extensive search that lasted several months, ultimately uncovering human bones. DNA tests confirmed the remains belonged to Fitzpatrick, a fact officially announced to the public. Investigators believe Strong may have had additional victims, possibly at least one more woman. A significant detail emerged early on when Adams' personal belongings were confiscated at his first interrogation, including a chain with 3 rings. Strong later requested the chain's return, emphasizing the emotional value of the rings. 2 of the rings were identified by the families of Rory and Candace as belonging to their daughters, but the 3rd ring's owner remains unknown, hinting at further unresolved mysteries in the case.